Okay, today's May 28, 2023. I'm Reverend Walter Frank Jr., pastor of Family Church of San Diego. Today is the 990th Pentecost Sunday. It's that moment when the Holy Spirit came to the disciples of Christ in the upper room and changed their lives forever. Right? They gained power and communication. It's also 150. Tomorrow is the 158th Memorial Day in the USA after the Civil War finished. Memorial Day is remembering forever those who died for the sake of freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of movement, all those freedoms, all the prosperity we enjoy and appreciate that came from those who unfortunately gave their lives for our sake, right? And all over the world, people are remembering Memorial Day. This is in Normandy, France. This is in Normandy, France, where people are putting flags. French people are putting flags on American graves. Isn't that amazing? We should appreciate that other people all over the world. And by the way, these memorials are all over the world. They're all over the world. There's American soldiers buried everywhere in the world. In Luzon, in Korea, in all kinds of different countries. This is the Netherlands, where they still put the flags up. This is Korea. This is Korean soldiers remembering. We'll remember you forever from Korea and the United States for the Americans who died to save Koreans during the Korean War. Right? This is Dutch American liberators who helped defeat Nazis in World War II, and it just keeps going on. The reason we honor this, we're Americans, we're religious people, we're not honoring war. We're honoring people who died so there wouldn't be war, so that there would be peace, right? We say, and we believe in the divine principle terms that the kind of history we're in is restoration history. It's restoration, trying to restore the world to a heavenly place. And that restoration history is a history of Cain versus Abel. Cain killed Abel originally, and that's been going on ever since. From an individual problem, that is your Abel-like mind overcoming your Cain-like body. That is jealousy, racism, sloth, gluttony, drug addiction. Wasn't there one more? Wasn't there one more? I remember it was lust, but nobody here has that problem, so it's probably we didn't remember it right off the bat. Number 2, families. Cain killed Abel in families, and sometimes families struggle with one another. Societies. We have internecine or civil war amongst our societies, which we've experienced. Nations and religions, of course, and finally worldwide conflict on both physical and ideological battlefields, such as World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. Right? Unfortunately, we're still fighting wars because of nuclear proliferation and the philosophy of mad, mutually assured destruction. There's not been a world war since World War II, which I think we should appreciate. Okay, this is what it comes to, right? This Cain-like problem, Cain killing Abel. Genesis 6:6, the Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. If you lived through World War I, if you were Jewish in Europe in 1942, you would think this is absolutely true, wouldn't you? You would think absolutely, only hell all the time. If you were a Chinese person in China in 1942, you would think this is absolutely true. The atrocities, the killing, the murder, the torture, the starvation are beyond human understanding. Right? And we say this is why, this picture we always draw, Satan has become the god of this world because human beings worship Satan through worshiping fallen nature. That is, whatever it is, jealousy, as we mentioned, jealousy, lust, hatred, right? Satan is the god of this world, and Satan is the god of these wars, in the beginning of all these wars. That's why ideology, that's why Reverend Moon said ideology, our belief system, is so important. Without an ideology of making God first, there's not really a hope of ending wars. There's not really a hope of peace. Ephesians, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. We think about the wars are physical wars over oil or food or land or whatever we think, but it's not true. The real war is against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual horrors who we will call Satan or evil spirit world, right? Most people don't believe that. They don't even believe in ghosts. There have been thousands of various wars. However, there are two types of struggles between God's side and Satan's side. The first is that some wars are central to God's providence. And we'll talk a little bit about them today. And wars, God's providence and restoration. The others are peripheral. We're not going to discuss them today because we only have 20 more minutes. We think providentially, central to God's providence was a Revolutionary War of the United States. Why do we think that? Because it created the first constitutional democracy. There's no coincidence that this was based upon Judeo-Christian values, which are subject, united with Cain-type words like democracy and Greek-type values, with the subject being Christian-type, right? And listen to this. Interesting thing to me is the American colonies declared independence from England, right? Did the Americans declare war on England? No, it's the other way around, right? So England, the most powerful country in the world, so Americans colonies declared independence. England, most powerful country in the world at that time, declared war on the Americans, and somehow, magically, the Americans prevail. Isn't that odd? That the most powerful nation would attack the weak, was not even a nation, 13 colonies. They didn't have a name for themselves yet. And nevertheless, the 13 colonies won the war. That's incredible, isn't it? Should really think. That's why we think it's a providential part of God's providence. And by the way, since that time, there are now, 100, 120 constitutional democracies in the world today. And that was the first one. So that's pretty amazing. So the first Memorial Day, since we're talking about Memorial Day and the United States, happened in 1865. And this is a story from Harriet Tubman, an eyewitness testimony from her. Now, I think there should be statues of Harriet Tubman everywhere. And I think if we cut down all the statues of Robert E. Lee or any of those people, cut them all down as far as I'm concerned, and make statues of Harriet Tubman, the real hero of American history. She said at 13 years old, she had heard the shrieks and cries of women who were flogged in the Negro quarter. She had listened and groaned out in prayer, "Oh Lord God, please have mercy on us." Right? Can you imagine? You're being tortured, beaten. She had already seen two older sisters taken away as part of a chain gang. She had seen the agonized expression on their faces as they turned to take a last look at their old cabin home. She said she had to climb up on the fence and wave bye to her sisters, and they were just taken away to be slaves in some other field somewhere. And she watched them from the top of the fence as they went off weeping and lamenting till they were hidden from her sight forever. Can you imagine somebody taking your children away, taking them as slaves and chains somewhere else? How would you feel or think? Would you beg God to save you? Would you beg God to please send somebody to stop this? That's what Harriet Tubman thought. Here's her eyewitness testimony. She helped a slave named Joe to escape. Joe was described as strong and powerful and an intelligent and faithful person. He was a slave purchased by her slave owner, and went before he was in charge of a whole plantation because he was so smart and successful and such a good slave, they thought. Being valuable, he was sold at a high price. His new master began by beating him to show them that he must obey at all times the orders of his master. He completely crushed and wrecked by this guy. So this is just a similar picture, right? So he escaped to Canada the next day at the guidance of Harriet Tubman. Okay, my point is this. Memorial Day is here because the prayers for people to God to send somebody were finally answered. Were finally answered, right? Cain killed Abel unmercifully. Beat him to death, right? Depending on which translation. Beat him to death with a club. The Hebrew people in Egypt were treated unmercifully, cruelly enslaved generation after generation. So what did they do? They prayed to God. Can you please send someone to save us from this horrible... They were taking Jewish baby boys and throwing them in the Nile River to feed the crocodiles, right? Again, can you imagine that happens to your child or your kid or your grandson? No, you can't imagine that, right? So, however, Moses, called by God, sacrificed his position as Prince of Egypt. Can you imagine that? Prince of Egypt. And he says, no, I'll give that up to save my Hebrew brothers and sisters. Do you think that was God's message to him, or he just thought that? I believe God called, not only prepared Moses, but called and prepared Moses to save his fellow Hebrew people. So Memorial Day, this is what I think. Memorial Day, although American in origin, is really a day to remember all those who gave their lives for God's will and the service of others on the earth. Saints beyond number. And that's why we're here, right? Also, today is Pentecost Sunday, the turning point of history where God's side raises up good men to defend his children. Right? African American slaves are still God's children. Right? On the other hand, God influences humans to do good and to liberate others from Satan's grip. Some people say you should not mix religion and politics. Usually that's the slavers. Usually slavers don't want Christians to be involved in politics because they will quit trafficking, quit letting the drug cartels get away, quit letting those things happen, quit letting people murder other people, other innocents, right? The abolitionist movement was a direct result of the Protestant Reformation of Christianity. So Pentecost happened, disciples grew, Catholicism grew, the Pentecostal movement of Protestant Reformation happened, and what happened? The development of Quakerism, right? Became an abolitionist group who fought hard and made the Underground Railroad that allowed Harriet Tubman and her ex-slaves to escape, right? The development of Methodism also, just like the Quakers, worked together to get slaves out of the South. Northern Baptist Church was abolitionist. All these groups are abolitionists and pressed upon the northern states to make new voting to outlaw slavery. So what happens is, based on all these things, the abolitionist movement was a direct result of the Protestant Reformation of Christianity, and the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln and non-slave states is a direct result of Pentecost. Right? It just follows puzzle piece after puzzle piece, chain after chain link, until we get to this idea that there'll be no slavery. At the signing of the U.S. Constitution, how many of the colonies allowed slavery? Does anybody know? Any historians? Any judges? Anybody know? No. No, they didn't. At the Constitution, only 5 allowed slavery. The other 8 said no. Rhode Island, New York, a couple of other, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, they all said no to slavery. In the state constitutions, they said we will not have slaves here. That's why there's a difference, right? So we say the states, that the United States wasn't one country. It wasn't one Abel-like country or Cain-like country. The states in the north that disallowed slavery are the Abel-like states. The states in the south who allowed slavery and enforced slavery were Cain-like states. And that's the description of the United States. And this of course, the election of Abraham Lincoln caused the South to secede from the Union and eventually erupt in the Civil War. So this is David W. Blythe described this day. This was the first Memorial Day. African Americans invented Memorial Day in Charleston, South Carolina. He says, what you have here is black Americans recently freed from slavery. Remember? These people were praying to God, begging God, save us from slavery, save us, let us be free people. And then God sends a Union Army, sends Abraham Lincoln, the Union Army, and they get saved, right? But not without cost. Recently freed from slavery, announcing the world with their flowers, their feet, and their songs that the war had been about. What they basically were creating was the Independence Day of a second American Revolution. Right? Together with teachers, remember this is where they came from. This is where they came from before the Civil War. Together with teachers and missionaries, black residents of Charleston organized a May Day ceremony in 1865, which was covered by the New York Tribune and other national papers. The freedmen cleaned up and landscaped the burial ground, building an enclosure and an arch labeled Martyrs of the Racecourse. And what those were prisoners of war of the South, American Union prisoners of war who died in the prison camp. Nearly 10,000 people, mostly freedmen, gathered on May 1st to commemorate the war dead. Involved were about 3,000 school children newly enrolled in freedmen schools, mutual aid societies, Union troops, black ministers, and white northern missionaries. Most brought flowers to lay on the burial field. Today the site is used as Hampton Park. Years later, the celebration will become to call First Decoration Day or... So, what African American people understood is those American soldiers didn't die because they were drafted. They died because God called them and answered their prayers to save their lives. Does that make sense? That's why they worship like that. That's why they made it a holy ground and a sacred ground. Personally, I love the U.S. military because everyone should be aware of the insane cruelty, the demonic cruelty of the Cain side. This is what Winston Churchill said. We sleep safely at night because rough men stand ready to visit violence on those who would do us harm, on those who would harm us. Does that make sense? Marines are rough people, right? We had a lot of Marines in our church here. They're rough people. But that's what's necessary, unfortunately. We sleep safely at night because rough men stand ready to visit violence on those who would harm us. Yes, they are rough men called in self-defense or in defense of innocence to do horrible things. They did horrible things to enemy nations. They bombed the hell out of nations. They killed thousands of people. But why? It's not just because they're full of hate or they're defending what's right in God's eyes. Just like if somebody came to hurt your children, you would probably fight them, right? Just like a bear, just like the grizzly bear mom, when a wolf comes to hurt her cubs, the grizzly bear mom goes crazy and tears the wolf to pieces. Was Moses a rough man, do you think? Right? Yes, he killed an Egyptian slaver who was beating an innocent Hebrew slave. That's rough, right? But is it righteous? I think Moses was righteous. I think God thought, yes, I want this man to defend and save my Hebrew children from slavery. Right? How about more? Was Moses a rough man? How about this one? What if he had been there when Cain was beating Abel to death? Do you think he would have stopped Cain? Absolutely. He would have stopped Cain. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about American military. Someone who's willing to stop Cain even at the cost of their own life. So, on the other hand, this is what also God says. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that they turn from his way and live. God doesn't want people to be killed on either side. On either side, God doesn't want people to be killed. Result of the Civil War, approximately 620,000 soldiers died from combat, accidents, starvation, and disease during the Civil War. However, what was the result? The result was the 13th Amendment, January 31st, 1865, ratified December 6, 1865. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. Would the slaves think that's worth it? Yeah, because there was millions of slaves saved from slavery. Cost of lives. That's why, by the way, that's why Lincoln said, I don't want, if I have to go to war to end slavery, I don't want to go to war. Because he understood this would be internecine war. We'd kill millions. How about the next? In the understanding of restoration history central to God's providence, Satan attacks on a worldwide level. So this is directly from the Divine Principle book, The Great Wars. The cause of the Great War, by the way, Reverend Moon wrote this. He must have been thinking about this, right? And you think, this is not me. Reverend Moon wrote this. And by the way, he lived through these things, right? The cause of the Great War is viewed from the providence of restoration through indemnity. Wars always break out because of political, economic, and ideological causes, but these are no more than external causes. We must know that there are internal causes, just as there are both internal and external causes in human action. That is, human action is decided not only by man's external free will, which tends to cope with the reality with which he is confronted, but also by man's internal free will, which tends to adjust to God's will by heading for the purpose of the providence of restoration. Therefore, the good or evil of human actions must not be judged by the external cause alone. This is why our understanding of ideology, and it's why the faith of our membership is so important. The worldwide conflict between opposing actions, both of which occur in accordance with men's free will, has resulted in the Great World War. So we must know that also in this case, there should be both internal and external causes. Consequently, we can grasp the providential significance of the Great World Wars if we consider only the external causes such as politics, economy, and ideology. So, this is the internal cause of the Great World Wars. Satan wants to dominate the whole world. And, right, he wants to be the god of this age. So, why do these countries always become totalitarian and want world domination? This is why evil powers are totalitarian in nature. In God's world, so the ideal is God's ideal, that God would be one God, one world, one people, one family under God, right? That's what we think God's ideal is. So Satan wants to make a world that's centered on him, the opposite of God's world. Does that make sense? Satan tries to create a totalitarian world like God's, but it's evil. That is, there's one totalitarian government. For example, Hitler wanted a 1,000-year Reich. Stalin and Putin now makes himself dictator for life. Mao and Xi has now declared himself dictator for life and is trying to take over Taiwan, Hong Kong, Tibet, and other countries in the area. Why? Because they think they get their information from this person, that they should be in charge of the whole world, not God, our heavenly parent, right? And they always teach one truth, whether it's Nazism, Marxism, whether it's ISIS, and they're unbelievably cruel because Satan is unbelievably cruel, demonic in fact, with all power and no dissent, right? Cain cruelly murdered Abel. Cain-type governments cruelly murder God's children, cruelly persecute Christians, Jews, even Buddhists, right? They kill everybody. And they don't just kill them, they torture them to death. Where does it come from? It comes because Father understood this is the ideology of the left, whether they believe it or not, whether they know it or not. This is the internal cause of all the cruelty in the wars on earth. And it's unbelievable cruelty, isn't it? As we've already seen, due to the fall of the first human ancestors, Satan has always realized in advance, so always Cain strikes first, the non-principal world in the pattern of the principle, imitating the world of the principle God was going to realize. So, on the other hand, God, working after him, has performed his providence to restore his world of principle, gradually broadening the territory of goodness out of the non-principal world that had been under satanic dominion. So, the USA begins a constitutional government centered on freedom of religion, and now 100 nations do that, right? In the course of the providence of restoration, a false one would always appear before the true one comes. As a representative example, the Bible says an Antichrist would come before the true Christ. Cause of the Great War is viewed from the providence of restoration through indemnity. What then must be the internal cause of the Great World Wars, as interpreted by the providence of restoration of indemnity? First, the Great World Wars broke out because the last struggle of Satan tried not to let his opponent take away his sovereignty. As we have already seen, due to the fall of the first human ancestors, Satan always realized in advance the non-principal world in the pattern of the principle, imitating the world the principal God was going to realize. Satan's fierce struggle for external dominion of the earth against Christian democracies is the 2,000-year preparation for the LSA. Is the 2,000-year preparation for the Lord's second advent is finished. So that means the Messiah is going to be born. We think Messiah is going to be born in 1920, right? So when does Satan begin his war of world conquest?
1917.
Exactly right, 1917. Because 1920 is coming, Satan begins a world war, right? And Western civilization is growing throughout the whole world, ending slavery all over the world. So Cain strikes Abel on a worldwide level. Kaiser Wilhelm, the Second Reich, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire represent Adam, Eve, the archangel on the Cain side, and the USA, France, and England represent Adam and Eve and the archangel on the Abel side. This is the indemnity condition to restore restoration of the three blessings on the worldwide level. That is like wrestling with the archangel. Satan is the ruler of this world, so the United States and the allies are going to wrestle with him. result in deadly conditions accomplished Christian democracies defend themselves with the help of the United States of America. Evil is defeated on the formation stage level. The growth stage level will bring the rise of totalitarian socialism, Satan's false kingdom of heaven on the earth. Socialism is always evil. Do you know why? Because socialism means a few super smart people run everything, run all the businesses, run everything. It never works. That's why socialist countries are always broke. And the endemic condition to bring the Lord's second advent. So the November 11th, is it? Yeah, 11 a.m., World War I ends, right? Armistice Day. So, and then January 6th, Reverend Moon is born. See how it works? Wow. Divine principle. How did Father know that? Anyhow, so here's what it looks like. The external world. So this is Germany, that country right there, and that included Prussia, which was now Poland, etc., etc. Here's England. See this color? What color is that? Orange. Whatever it is. Anyway, these are all England's colonies, right? This is France. These are all French colonies, right? So if the Germans defeat France and England, what happens to the colonies? They go to Germany. And then what we have, if in World War I the USA had not fought to save Western Europe, the entire Asian world and Africa would have become slaves to Kaiser Wilhelm and the Ottoman Muslim Empire. So it's not just a war in Europe. It's a war in Europe over all these colonies. And fortunately, U.S. Marines showed up, right? Evil plans foiled by the U.S. Marine Corps at Belleau Wood. Unfortunately, Satan isn't finished, right? But the U.S. Marine Corps changed the whole course of the war. French were in retreat. That's where the American general, I forgot what his name is, Marines would know. Retreat, hell, I just got here. And then they defeated the German army. And of course, it wasn't without cost. This is Asni. Where's Solange when we need her? The 42.5 acre Asni Marne Cemetery, a memorial in France, sits at the foot of the hill where it stands Belleau Wood. The cemetery contains the graves of 2,289 war dead, and it's considered sacred ground. That's our men, our young men who died at that time. See, American flags everywhere, right? John 15:13, greater has no man than this, that to lay down one's life for his friends. And that's exactly what's going on. It's not. There's internal reasons. It's not just an external war that nobody cares about. World War II, Satan develops a new kind of society called totalitarianism to enslave people. Hitler, Tojo, Mussolini, just as Cain attacked Abel, Axis powers attack democracies first. Satan hates humanity. Satan hates Hebraism. That's why there's a Holocaust. Satan hates Christians and humanity in general. 55 million of people were killed during World War II, and the cruelty and hatred of Satan was released. And this is demonic suffering, right? Demonic evil. When the British armies come to the concentration camps, it says Britain's enraged by new Nazi horrors. It wasn't just army or military. They created horrors of cruelty. Where does that come from? That comes directly from Satan. Imperial Japanese war crimes and crimes against humanity. R.J. Romo, a professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, estimates that between 1937 and 1945, the Japanese military murdered from nearly 3 to 10 million people. Most likely 6 million Chinese, Koreans, Malaysians, Indonesians, Filipinos, and Indo-Chinese, among others including Western prisoners of war. According to Romo, in China alone, during 1937 to 1945, approximately 3.9 million Chinese were killed, mostly civilians as a direct result of Japanese operations, and a total of 10.2 million Chinese were killed during the course of the war. And this is a very, very conservative estimate. Some people think 30 million Chinese were killed. Unfortunately, I have several uncles who were in the Philippines at the time. One uncle, Isidro Gajo, was tortured by the Japanese. Really? He explained to us how evil the Japanese were. The most infamous incident during this period was the Nanking Massacre of 1937 to 38, when according to the findings of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, the Japanese army massacred as many as 300,000 civilians and prisoners of war, although accept the figure somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of people tortured and killed unmercifully. Again, why is it? Why? Because the Cain side follows Satan's side. They don't know it. They don't say, yes, Satan, we're killing people. But it's the internal reason for all this evil to take place. Who, after the Americans ended slavery in the United States and around the world, who introduced slavery back into the world? Who introduced slave labor camps? Hitler embraced Darwin's survival of the fittest concept and applied it to promote the Aryan race and murder the unfit. You could read from many, many survivors of concentration camps, again, the demonic, unbelievable cruelty of the Cain side to children and women. It's not possible for you to imagine. I mean, you could read Elie Wiesel and the other ones. He was captured in the summer of 1940. No, in the winter of 1944. He lasted 6 months until the end of the war, right? But he said everybody who went in before him was dead. Everybody. Only people who were survivors were there 6 months or less. Anyhow, it's just unbelievable, right? What about these people? Those are actual people our soldiers found suffering starvation, malnutrition, tortures. And this is the liberation, right? Who's liberating them? Whose flag is saving these people from this hell on earth? From this literal hell on earth? Americans. Americans went there. Americans saved them. The Bataan Death March is also another sign of just inhuman cruelty to human beings. Where does it come from? It comes because Satan is the god of this world, and the people who follow them followed Satan. It's the internal cause. And by the way, our own Korean brothers and sisters, true parents, suffer this same cruelty. If you read Father's book or Mother's book, then you'll realize Father suffered under these Japanese people. Because this is it. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth. If you were in China, if you were in Europe, if you were in Asia, if you were in any of these places, if you were in Ethiopia and Africa, Northern Africa, then you would think, yes, there's nothing but evil continually from the mind of these evil men. And they were making manifest on the earth Satan's world, Satan's horrible world of hell on the earth. Right? And I'm sorry to put it like that, but that's simply the truth. It's simply the truth. It's simply the horrible truth. Finally, they surrendered. Finally, Americans, thank God, American soldiers, of whom 450,000 young American men and women died during this war, finally ended the war with Europe and Japan, right? World enters an era of peace today. Rationing of gasoline ends today. God bless them. What do they think? Wow, we get gas now. Thank you. And of course, there's a worldwide celebration of the end of World War II. USA, England, France, Philippines, Korea, China, Australia, New Zealand, and many other countries all celebrated, all had a worldwide celebration, right? We can't see it. We don't know it yet. But thank God how great it was. These are Czechoslovakian ladies appreciating American soldiers saving their lives. I know it's a hard picture to understand, but I liked it. Results of World War II, Satan develops totalitarianism to enslave people. However, Axis powers attack democracy first. The result, democracy overcomes totalitarianism to succeed on the growth stage level. Cain is unable to kill Abel because rough men are prepared to protect us from Satan. Abel strikes Cain, and led by the USA, Christian democracies after the war forgave their enemies, which is unbelievable in human history. We have Japanese brothers and sisters here. Don't we love our Japanese brothers and sisters? Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. And by the way, Japan is no longer Imperial Japan. That's gone. We love our brothers and sisters. We're glad you're here. We love you. We feed you. Right? And this forgiving of enemies paid the indemnity to free colonies throughout the world. Peace and prosperity. Satan hates Hebraism, caused the Holocaust, but that indemnity resulted in the nation of Israel being established, and Christianity rises to its zenith. Jesus Christ appoints Reverend Moon to begin the blessing of marriage. The goals of all this is the creation of God's image families This is the foundation. This is foundational to Christianity, right? Pretty amazing. Maybe you guys read this in Mother's autobiography, but I thought you'd read it because you understand Mother and Father experienced this. They didn't read about it. They didn't see it on television. They didn't hear a sermon. Mother actually experienced this. This is from Mother's biography. In 1948, when the oppression of religions by North Korea's Communist Party was at its height, my mother and grandmother were imprisoned for nearly 2 weeks for being members of the Inside the Womb Church. And their minister, Ho Hui Bin, was murdered by them in prison, right? I was 5 years old at the time, and I would go to the prison to see my mother, right? And her mother, remember, Mother and Damon and her mother were imprisoned by these people, so they decided they had to escape. But I'm going to read just this part because I don't have time to read her whole biography. This is Mother's words. She says it was early on. They've already escaped down to the south. They're living in Seoul, Korea. It was early on a hot summer morning. Red balsam flowers blossomed on one side of our courtyard, and thick old willow and sycamore trees stood along the street. I was 7 years old, but I remember the moment clearly as a frantic neighbor burst into our living room with the words, "War has broken out. The North Korean army has broken the line of defense across the 38th parallel." So Mother now experiences not just persecution, but war. She says, 2 days later, my mother woke up at dawn and began packing our clothes in a bundle. Awakened by the rustling noise, I kept my eyes shut and listened to her conversation with my grandmother. "We have to seek refuge," my mother said. "After the communists get here, they'll kill us." "I know they are bad," my grandmother responded, "but do you think they would treat women harshly?" "If they find out that we have escaped from the north," my mother reasoned, "they will probably kill us on the spot." So this is Mother's life growing up, by the way. So when Mother says we must have world peace, this is what she experienced growing up, right? The bombing of the Han River Bridge took place at 3 a.m. on June 28, 1950. Even though the South Korean government had announced that it would defend Seoul, it blew up the only bridge leading to safety, even before the North Korean People's Army came into the city. Hundreds of people fleeing the city were killed. Amid this desperate crisis, through the help of my uncle, my life and the lives of my family were preserved. At that critical moment, God guided me and protected me from danger. So this next slide is just before the bombing of the bridge. Mother says, "Hurry," he barked. "We have to move now." Uncle Soon Jung, based in the Army headquarters as a military medic, was aware of the progress of the war. As soon as he heard that the South Korean Army was preparing to destroy the Han River Bridge, he requisitioned a truck and sped to our home, knowing his family was in danger. He left the truck with its engine running in our foggy alley. We climbed in with our already packed bundle, and he drove toward the bridge. In the pre-dawn hours, crowds of refugees were swarming there from all directions, creating total chaos, right? Because they got to get out of Seoul. As soon as we crossed the bridge, my uncle shouted, "Get down in your seats." As I squeezed down on the floor at my mother's feet, a huge explosion behind us shook our truck. There was a blue flash and a deafening sound. My uncle set the emergency brake and turned off the engine. Together we jumped out of the truck and climbed down into the ditch at the side of the road. I turned my face to the bridge and witnessed the next explosion. I saw a light like a demon's burning eyes piercing the night. Countless civilians, as well as soldiers and policemen who were crossing the bridge, were thrown about like plastic toys, flying everywhere, cast into the river below. A few meters had measured the distance between life and death. Our lives have been spared, right? God bless. God, Mother being protected. I closed my eyes and many thoughts flashed across my mind. Why would anyone start a war? Why do innocent people die? Why is God permitting such pain and suffering? Who can bring an end to this madness? I could not conceive of any answers. Again, she is 7 years old. She now has many answers. When I reopened my eyes, I saw that the bridge was cut in half. The military had accomplished its mission at the cost of hundreds of lives. What remained amid the corpses, the screaming wounded, and the dazed survivors was an ugly skeleton of steel smoldering in the dark. Mother says this, "Even today, whenever I cross a bridge over the Han River, I see that blue flash and hear people's agonized screams echoing as if they still are burning in hell. My heart aches at the sound. At a young age, I directly witnessed the horror of war and experienced the wretched life of a refugee. The simple and innocent were killed like flies. Children who had lost their parents were crying and wandering in the streets. I was only 7, but it became so serious that war has to vanish forever from the world. It took place 7 years ago, but my throat still tightens when I recall the night the Han River Bridge fell. So that's mother and father. I didn't read father's side, but father was in prison camps by the Japanese, by the Koreans. He suffered through the war. He saw corpses. He saw dead people dying. They lived an unbelievable life seeing the horrors of Genesis 6:6. Right? They saw them, felt them, they knew them, they understood it, and understood the reason for it. We say today is Pentecost Sunday, the turning point of history where God's side raises up good men to defend his children. We should remember tomorrow's Memorial Day. We should remember the freedom, prosperity, love we have, the freedom and peace for our children, grandchildren, and billions of others around the world. And joy is due to the sacrifice and victory of Jesus Christ and his saints, which includes, if you ask me, the U.S. military. Tomorrow is Memorial Day. Today we remember our great prosperity and freedom is due to those who gave their lives for our blessings and those veterans that survived. I'm sure many of our dads were there, right? My dad was there. He joined the Navy in 1942. Yeah. So we say, everybody got to think external things about the world, but we say, this is God's hand. This is God's answer to Mother's prayer. Who can save us from this hell? Right? Who can save us from this hell? It's God's hand in human affairs to raise up America as the mightiest military on the face of the earth. Peace has reigned on the Korean Peninsula due to the military might and wealth and courage of the United States of America. So God bless our soldiers. God bless all those who have passed on Memorial Day. And World War III, the Cold War. Unfortunately, Marxism still exists, right? It's not over yet. Fallen nature is attracted to this false ideology of power and hatred of the rich, for example. President and dictator of life Xi of China seems, unfortunately, far smarter than his Russian counterparts. He is using capitalism with a small c to destroy capitalism with a large C, right? Anybody listen to the Drudge Report or hear his talks? Anyhow. However, in God's battle with worldwide Cain, how many righteous people there are is more important than how many bad people there are. And this is something I really want to make clear. Our faith is significant. The internal reasons for God to work is based on our internal faith, not how many aircraft carriers the United States has. Although that's important, our faith is more important. As in Sodom and Gomorrah, who saves the city, right? Abraham argues with God, and God says, look, if you could just find 10 righteous people, I'll save the people. God did not say to Abraham, count all the Sodomites in Sodom. See how many there are. If there's too many, I'll kill them all. He doesn't say that. God says, how many righteous are there? How many people have faith in true parents? How many people have faith in Jesus Christ? How many people have faith in God's will and follow the commandments of Jesus to love God with your whole heart, your whole soul, your whole mind, and to love your neighbor? This is what counts. This is what counts to save. This is the most important thing to save our nation, is our faith and our good works. Right? As in Sodom and Gomorrah, find just 10 righteous. It is the faith of the righteous that is most important to avoid a weapons-based Third World War, which the whole world wants to avoid. Does that make sense? Even China wants to avoid it. True father and mother survived based upon their faith and the faith of many blessed couples throughout the world. They weren't killed. They weren't destroyed. They were able to establish the Chun Wangung just recently, right? That means God's will on earth is growing, not fading. God's work will continue to grow because they have been successful. That's where we come in. That's where we come in, by establishing our faith and our work supporting Heavenly Parents' dream of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Works, for example, blessed couples remaining faithful to one another. If adultery was the destruction of Adam and Eve, then your faithfulness to your spouse is the opposite, is the destruction of Satan's world. That's what True Father said. If you blessed couples remain faithful to each other, then Satan will be kicked out of this world. So again, it doesn't matter how many unrighteous people there are. God isn't counting them. It's how many righteous true parents God can depend on. How many righteous people God can find that will save our nation. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. God bless you. I hope you like that. I hope it's interesting.